All right, in today's video, I want to be talking all about EQ and giving you general EQ advice and going through several different topics all about EQ. So we're going to start with the purpose of EQ and how to think about it, low pass versus high pass filters, subtractive EQ versus additive EQ, EQ in context versus solo EQing, surgical EQ, also resonance sweeping and what that is, mid-side EQ, dynamic EQ, and then we're going to lastly talk about EQing on the master. Now, before we get started, make sure you look in the description below and grab my free mix training. It'll help save you a lot of time, money, and frustration on your EDM production and mixing journey. So make sure you go grab that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I went ahead and I've got Ableton's EQ8 and I have FabFilter Pro Q4. I'm going to mostly use Ableton's EQ because it's a free EQ, comes with Ableton. But if you're ever to buy a EQ, I would go with FabFilter Pro Q4. I think it's the best EQ that money can buy. It's the only EQ that you'll ever really need. And so if you're out there trying to buy plugins, I think the Pro Q4 is the way to go. So what is the main purpose of EQ? Well, we use EQ in order to shape each sound, signal, or instrument, whatever you want to call it, in our mix. That way it fits together with all the other sounds in our track. And so in EDM, for example, it can get pretty complex because you might have 50 tracks or even 100 tracks. And so what we want to do is use EQ to carve out, kind of like, think about it like a puzzle piece that you're putting together a puzzle that you're actually creating in real time. And so if you have these puzzle pieces that aren't fully shaped yet, they're not going to fit together. That's the way that I like to view this. And so just to really quickly understand what we're doing with compression, let's go ahead and take a listen to this raw vocal. Here's a raw vocal with nothing on it and no EQ or anything. It's recorded really well, but I want to show you how we can use EQ to really enhance it.
I feel the fire, the flames igniting my veins, chemistry when I'm with you.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a high pass filter, and I'm going to talk more about those in a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go like this.
I feel the fire, the flames igniting my veins.
And so what I did is I cut out any low frequencies that I don't need. And next thing I'm going to do, just really quickly to kind of, for sake of example, is this is called a shelf. I'm going to go ahead and boost up these high frequencies just like that. And then we're going to go back and forth so you can really hear the difference.
I feel the fire, the flames igniting my veins, chemistry when I'm with you.
Okay, now go ahead and take a listen with no EQ, and I'll turn the EQ on.
I feel the fire, the flames igniting my veins, chemistry when I'm with you.
So you can hear that the difference there is that the vocal becomes a lot more crisp and nice to listen to. Even if a vocal is recorded really well, we're most likely going to have to EQ it. And a good rule of thumb is EQing vocals is actually really easy because you can actually basically shape the vocal however much you want. You can boost the highs and cut the lows and make it really shiny and sound nice. And then you can kind of mix everything around that because a vocal is the most important part of your track if your track has a vocal. And so you actually do want to do things like boost the high end and really make it nice and bright and forward and shiny, because relative to everything else, we want the vocal to really stand out. Okay. And so that's kind of a basic, like, why we use EQ. Okay. So to basically get rid of sounds we don't want, enhance the stuff of the sound that we do want, and to be able to put sounds together, which I'm going to get to a little bit more here in a second, because now we're going to go ahead and talk about low pass versus high pass filters. So what you just saw me do was you saw me make a high pass filter. And what that means is it just means high pass just means we're letting the frequencies above, like high, pass through. That's the easiest way you can remember it. A low pass filter would look more like this. Okay. Just to make this really simple and show you how this works, I'm going to take this pluck instrument right here, and I got an EQ, right? So I really just want this mid-range of it. And let's say I've got this bass right here. Now that sounds okay, but we can actually go ahead and clean this up so they're not clashing as much. And you might not notice this a lot, but when we do this over time and have several instruments on top of each other, it's going to really, really help clean up the mix. So first thing I'll do is I'll take this, put a high pass filter, and I'll just go ahead and solo it. It's good to, and I was going to cover this later, but I might as well cover it now. It's good to EQ in the context. I tend to solo things and EQ them, but then I'll check them. But a good rule of thumb is to always make sure you're checking things that you EQ in the context of the mix. If you EQ everything in solo, then you're going to end up like something might sound really good solo, but then it won't fit into the mix. But right now, just to show you, so I don't really need anything below there. Maybe like a little bit of the body, so I boost like that. And then now, if I go down here and I'll solo this bass, maybe I do want that higher frequency, and let's go ahead and take that EQ so you can see what it looks like. But I could do something like this. And now let's go ahead and I'll solo and put them together. Now let's turn that off and then turn this one off. So like I said, it's subtle, but right here is a good example of how you might use a high pass filter on a higher instrument to get rid of any unnecessary lows, and then a low pass filter on kind of a bass instrument. But then again, I could also have just left this bass alone, but still there's a lot of benefit to at least using a high pass filter on these plucks, because like I said, all of that low stuff we just don't need. And so we're just using the part of the pluck that we want to be heard. Okay? So that's low pass filters and high pass filters explained, and also the concept of just checking in your EQing in context. And now let's talk about subtractive versus additive EQ. And I'm going to keep this pretty quick because to me, it's not really that big of a deal. And so subtractive EQ sounds like what it is. It basically just means you are subtracting frequencies or the gain from certain frequencies from your sound, where additive means you are boosting the frequencies. And a lot of the times you're going to have to do a mix of both. And there's kind of like this debate in audio engineer world, whatever, where it's like you want to do subtractive EQ because if you do additive EQ, then you're going to end up getting a harsh mixes or whatever. I don't really agree with that. I think you just have to constantly check your mix and check your EQ and context and literally just shape your signal that you're working with however you want. And I'm going to show you why, just an example of this. So let's say I go like this, and that's a additive EQ, right? I'm boosting. Well, if I take this, another EQ, that's pretty much the same thing as if I just lowered, if I lowered this and looked like something like that. You're going to get the same thing. The only difference here is this one, I boosted the signal, so now I just have to turn it down a little bit. And this one, I took away some of the gain. So I guess it's a good practice to do some more subtractive EQ when you can. However, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter, and so I wouldn't really worry about it, and I would just do whatever sounds good. Like, if it sounds good, do that. That's really the best advice I could give. And when you're EQing, like I said before, always check everything in context, okay? So that's just subtractive versus additive EQ, and a lot of times you're going to have to do a mix of both, where you might boost the highs, take away some of the mids, in order to get the best sound out of the signal or whatever instrument you're working with as you can, okay? Now let's talk about surgical EQing and resonant sweeping. And so there is a tool. I'm going to go ahead and use this evaluate. I'm going to go ahead and use FabFilter Pro Q for this. There is a tool called Soothe, which is kind of a dynamic resonance processor, which kind of automatically hones in on resonant frequencies. But if you don't have that, I'm going to show you how you can do it right now and kind of sweep to find frequencies that you might not want. This works really well like on vocals, but also like on hi-hats and things like that. So if you take something like, I hold down Control, I solo this again, and now if I play it,
Fire,
let's go ahead and make sure I turn these EQs off.
fire, the flames
So
igniting
I can narrow the band using Control, like dragging up and down. And if I hold this headphone button, it's gonna solo just that frequency. So you can't hear it that well. If you can't, then just turn your volume up a little bit. So now you can just sweep through. So like right there, for example, I heard some stuff that sounded kind of harsh, and now I can go ahead and attenuate. I can double click, do that same process again. And see, like right there, you don't want to do this too much or go overboard with it, because some of those frequencies in there kind of are what create the character of a sound that you're working with. So for example, if you use saturation, it's going to add some of these, the character to your track. And then if you just take them all away, then it kind of takes away some of that character. So just be careful. But if you are working with like a hat, for example, and you just, when you're listening to it, it sounds like it's like harsh. Well, you can go in and you can kind of find that harsh frequency, and you can go ahead and attenuate it. And then it might just make it sit well in the mix and take away those harsh frequencies and just be easier on the ear. And so that's what I would do as far as any sound goes. If you're hearing some harshness, feels kind of like hard on the ears, go ahead and just sweep through and try to and then attenuate some of those frequencies. Okay, and since we're there already, I'm gonna go ahead and grab this Pro Q, and I'm gonna talk about using dynamic EQ. And so Pro Q 3 or 4 has this kind of built in, and the way you would set it up, let's just kind of get more of like a wide band here. You would go ahead and click and then do make dynamic. And now
fire, the flame.
You can see it's bumping. Now if you drag this, it's basically going to be compressing just a specific frequency range. And for this example, you can actually use this to de-ess your vocals. And so for right here, and you can do this on all sorts of different sounds. Here, let's go ahead and find where the S is, usually in like 10,000. Yeah. Okay, now watch this. I'm gonna go ahead, keep that fairly wide, make dynamic. I'm just gonna drag this down.
Fire, the flames igniting my veins, chemistry when I'm with you.
Now let's go before and after. So here's without it.
Fire, the flames igniting my veins. Fire, the flames igniting.
Okay, so it's not perfect. You do have to dial this in, but if you wanted to like de-ess and only like basically use that kind of compress like certain frequency ranges with dynamic EQ, you can do this. There's multi-band compression, but then also being able to use like a dynamic EQ in this way can really help you hone in and just compress like certain frequency ranges, and that's really helpful. So I would encourage you to get FabFilter Pro Q and check out different ways that you can
fire, the flame.
Like do some dynamic EQing. Okay, up next, I'm going to talk about mid-side EQ. So if you go ahead and I'll grab another Ableton EQ. So if you go over here, there's mode, and if you go to mid-side mode, and then now you can choose mid versus side, and all that means mid is just all the information that's in mono in the center, and then side is the information, is like stuff that's in like kind of the left and the right, the stereo information. And so what we can do with this is, just for example, I'll show you. So we've got, I put it on this whole group. If I wanted to kind of boost more of the sounds on the sides, let's go ahead and take this right here, and I'll actually make this a shelf, something like this. Now if you go back and forth, it's kind of subtle, but so what I did there is I added kind of almost like I added some width, when really I was just boosting the stuff on the sides. And that's one thing you can do where you boost that side information, and then you could also, if I go to like mono, and I can go ahead and hit the headphone mode too to kind of hear where I'm what I'm listening to. So like you can see, that's all mono information right there. And let's say you wanted to, for whatever reason, turn down the mono. Like if you hear like a resonant frequency, let's see. Okay, now let's go ahead and then we'll take a listen to the before and after. So I'll turn this, let's turn that headphone thing off. Okay, like this. Okay, here's with no mid-side EQ. And now with it. So it's subtle, but I add a little bit of clarity to it. And in general, I kind of made the sound a little bit better, made those plucks and the mid-high instruments sound a little bit better. And so I just put that on my whole group. I might actually just do just the plucks, for example. And you got to be kind of, like just make sure you're not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily do this on all of my instruments, but just for the example's sake, I wanted to show you how you can go ahead and use that and use mid-side EQ to either attenuate or boost just the sides, the stereo information, or the mono information. It's really basic. I mean, it's more advanced, but it's really like, don't overthink it. Mid-side EQ sounds more complicated than it really is. And so the last thing I want to talk about is EQing on the master. Now, in general, if you have a really, really good mix, you really don't need to do any EQing on the master. I would say like if you are EQing or if you're mastering for someone else, then you might have to. Like I tend to use more EQ on the master if I'm only mastering, but if I have a mix, then I'm going to try to fix anything that I can within the mix first. And I like to use the channel EQ because it's made to be used on a master channel. And so if I go ahead and play, and this track isn't finished by the way, but I'm going to go ahead and just, let's go find like the drop section or something. Or like, let's just work with this sound right here. You can do different things, like you can, if you boost like here, and then right here, you can drag it around. And then you can like attenuate maybe certain areas, but in general, I would never really make more than like 1 or 2 dB at the most adjustments to your master. Let's say you wanted to boost the highs. You could do that. I would just be very, very careful. Really, this talking about EQ on the master is just to get my point across, which is to be very, very careful if you're EQing on the master. If you find yourself making adjustments more than 1 to 2 dB, then just go back to your mix and fix the mix. You know, a big thing about what we're doing, producing, mixing, and mastering our own music as EDM producers, we get to go in and make these decisions and clean up our own mixes. And that's kind of the beauty of what we do. Or if you were to send it to someone like me or another mix and master engineer, they're most likely going to just make sure the mix is really good and not necessarily have to do any EQing on the master. Whereas if you export your track like to a stereo width file or a stereo file and then just send that to a mastering engineer, they probably will do some EQing, but it'll be very, very subtle. If they have to do a lot of EQ, they're going to just tell you to send a better mix. And it's really as simple as that. Okay. So that's the end of the video. These are like EQ basics for EDM producers. I hope this video helped, especially if you're like new or even a little bit more intermediate. And like I said before, grab my free mix training below. It'll help save you a lot of time, money, and frustration. And thanks for checking out the video. And I'll see you guys again next time. All right, see ya.